The ego is a tricky thing. It gives us a sense of identity, purpose, even survival in the social world. But when left unchecked, it can become our greatest enemy, blinding us to truth, disconnecting us from others, and ultimately keeping us from becoming who we truly are. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and father of analytical psychology, spent much of his life exploring the architecture of the human psyche. And one of his most profound teachings was on the nature of the ego, and more importantly, how to tame it. Jung saw the ego not as something evil, but as something partial, a necessary illusion that gives us a sense of self, yet also hides us from the totality of who we are. In his model, the ego is just a small island floating in the vast ocean of the unconscious. It's the I we think we are, our name, job, preferences, beliefs. But underneath that thin surface lies something far more powerful, the self, the totality of our conscious and unconscious being. To control the ego, we must first realize that we are not the ego, we are more. But that realization is painful, because it means confronting everything we've rejected, denied, or hidden, what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the part of us we refuse to acknowledge, our envy, rage, pride, lust, and cowardice. It's also our repressed creativity, potential, and passion. The ego wants to present a polished image to the world, one that's clean, admirable, and socially acceptable. But in doing so, it pushes the uncomfortable truths into the basement of the psyche. Over time, this creates a dangerous imbalance. The more you ignore your shadow, the more it controls you from the dark. You see this in people who are overly self-righteous, easily offended, or chronically insecure. Their ego is in charge, wearing a mask, while their unacknowledged shadow leaks out in passive-aggressive behavior, manipulation, or sudden outbursts. So how do you gain control of the ego? Not by destroying it. Jung never suggested that. Instead, the goal is to integrate it, by becoming aware of its limits and learning to dialogue with the unconscious parts of ourselves. This is the process of individuation, and it's one of the most important psychological journeys a person can take. Let's bring this into today's world. Modern society is ego-driven to its core. Social media has created a landscape where your persona is curated, filtered, and optimized for attention. Likes, followers, status symbols, these are all food for the ego. We're trained to compare, compete, and brand ourselves 24/7. But this leads to a brittle self-image, one that's easily shattered by criticism or failure. People don't know who they are without validation. That's the problem with an unexamined ego. It makes you reactive, insecure, and constantly performing. Jung's work reminds us that peace doesn't come from winning the ego game. It comes from going inward, from confronting the parts of ourselves we've been running from. For example, let's say you're someone who constantly feels the need to prove yourself. You chase money, status, and recognition, hoping it'll silence that inner voice that says you're not enough. That voice, that's the shadow. It's not your enemy. It's a messenger. Jung would say, sit with it. Ask it what it wants. Understand it. The more you bring awareness to the shadow, the less control it has over you. You stop reacting out of insecurity and start acting from self-awareness. Now, controlling the ego doesn't mean becoming passive or emotionless. It means developing what Jung called the observing self, a part of you that watches your thoughts and behaviors without judgment. In modern terms, it's emotional intelligence. When someone disrespects you, the ego wants to fight back or get revenge. But the observing self sees the situation clearly. It asks, why did that trigger me? What wound is being touched here? That pause, that inner reflection, is where control begins. You don't let your emotions control you. You use them as signals to understand yourself better. One of the most powerful modern applications of Jung's ego work is in relationships. Think about how many conflicts arise because two egos are clashing, each trying to be right, trying to win, trying to protect their image. Real intimacy begins when both people are humble enough to admit, I might be wrong, I have blind spots, let's figure this out together. That kind of vulnerability is impossible without ego control. And without it, you'll keep repeating the same toxic patterns, blaming others for problems rooted in your own shadow. Even in business and leadership, the ability to control your ego is a superpower. The best leaders aren't the loudest or the most dominant. They're the ones who can hold their vision without being consumed by their need to look powerful. They know how to listen, adapt, and admit when they're wrong. They're not ruled by pride. They're rooted in purpose. That's what happens when the ego is aligned with the self instead of fighting against it. Here's a simple but powerful practice to start this journey. Every day, write down the moments where your ego was in control. When you got defensive, jealous, arrogant, or insecure. Then ask yourself, what part of me was I trying to protect? What fear or wound is behind this reaction? Over time, you'll start to notice patterns, and those patterns are your shadow revealing itself. That's where the work begins. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Ego control isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending to be humble. It's about deep inner honesty, about facing yourself fully, not just the good parts, but the dark and hidden ones too. That's how you reclaim your power. That's how you stop being a puppet of your ego and start living as a whole human being. In a world obsessed with image, ego, and status, this kind of inner work is radical. It takes courage. But on the other side of that work is freedom. A freedom that no external achievement can give you. It's the freedom of being real, grounded, and in tune with your higher self. Not just chasing success, but becoming someone who can handle success. Not just building a brand, but becoming a man of substance. Not just making money, but making meaning. We live in a world that constantly tells us to be somebody. From childhood, we're taught to chase status, recognition, and identity. School rewards the best students. Sports reward the most dominant athletes. Social media glorifies those who shine the brightest. But behind all these pressures, behind all the noise, lurks a dangerous enemy. One that Robert Greene warns about repeatedly across his timeless works. That enemy is the ego. It is the voice inside that craves attention, validation, and power. It's the voice that tells you you've arrived when you've only just begun. And if you don't learn to tame that voice, you will sabotage yourself, guaranteed. Robert Greene never sugarcoats human nature. That's what makes his work so brutally effective. He doesn't write to make you feel good. He writes to make you aware. In the 48 Laws of Power, Greene shows how history is a chessboard of ego battles. Kings, generals, courtiers, and presidents all falling victim to their own inflated sense of self. In the Laws of Human Nature, he takes it a step deeper, exploring how ego blinds us from the truth and keeps us stuck in cycles of self-destruction. To Greene, the ego isn't just a flaw, it's a virus, one that spreads through ambition, praise, and even success. And here's the trap. The more successful you become, the harder it is to control your ego. Why? Because the ego thrives on winning. When you start making money, gaining followers, getting recognition, it whispers, "You're different now. You've made it. You don't need to listen anymore." That's when people stop learning. They stop adapting. They start believing they're invincible. And that's when the fall begins. Look at the countless celebrities, business moguls, and athletes who've lost everything, not because of their enemies, but because of their own arrogance. Their ego convinced them they were untouchable. So how do you control the ego? First, by understanding its nature. Robert Greene teaches that the ego is reactive. It feeds off emotion, especially pride, envy, and fear. When someone disrespects you, your ego screams to strike back. When someone gets more attention than you, it whispers jealousy. But Greene warns that power belongs to those who remain calm. He tells us that emotional responses are predictable, and predictability is weakness. If you want to be powerful in the modern world, you must master emotional distance. You must become the observer of your own impulses. Let's use an example. Imagine you're an entrepreneur building a brand. Things are going well. You've got clients, a following, momentum. Then someone criticizes your work publicly. Your ego feels attacked. You want to clap back, defend yourself, prove them wrong. But Greene would say, pause. Let others react emotionally. You respond strategically. He teaches us in Law 3, conceal your intentions. Don't let the world see your need to be validated. Stay mysterious. Stay composed. The person who controls their emotions always controls the situation. This applies to everyday life, not just business or war rooms. In relationships, ego shows up when you can't apologize, when you always need to be right, when you turn every disagreement into a competition. Greene would tell you, this is amateur behavior. Real strength is restraint. Real intelligence is adaptability. In Law 1, never outshine the master. He reminds us that even when you're right, flaunting your superiority only creates enemies. Let others have the spotlight when needed. Let their ego remain intact. Play the long game. It's not about being right, it's about being effective. Now, controlling the ego doesn't mean suppressing ambition or confidence. Greene is not telling you to play small. He's telling you to be precise, to master your emotions like a strategist, to stay grounded, even as the world throws you applause or criticism. One of the most powerful techniques he shares is rooted in self-awareness. In the laws of human nature, Greene emphasizes the need to study your own patterns, journal your emotional reactions, reflect on your insecurities. Ask yourself, what part of my identity am I trying to protect right now? When you do this regularly, you start to unmask the ego. You strip it of its power. In today's digital society, ego control is a competitive advantage. Social media is a playground for ego inflation. People chasing clout, faking lifestyles, engaging in public beef just to stay relevant. But the ones who truly win are usually quiet behind the scenes. They're not bragging, they're building. They're not performing, they're planning. Greene would admire this approach. In Law 30, make your accomplishments seem effortless. He teaches us that mystery is power. Don't broadcast your every move. Let the results speak. Protect your energy from unnecessary attention. The modern man who controls his ego is a rare force. He doesn't need to flex his success because he's secure in who he is. He doesn't fear criticism because he's always learning. He doesn't chase applause because he knows how easily it turns to silence. He plays the long game like a strategist, moving with intention, not impulse. That is the essence of Indecepta. A man who cannot be deceived by society, by others, or by his own ego. And remember, Greene's most powerful message is this: you are not exempt. No matter how evolved you think you are, the ego will always try to creep in, especially when you're winning. That's why ego control is a daily discipline. It's not something you conquer once, it's something you manage forever. Stay humble in your growth, stay hungry in your learning, stay detached in your success. Let others get caught in the highs and lows. You remain centered. At the end of the day, ego is about illusion. It creates stories about how important we are, how unfair the world is, how we're always right. But Greene reminds us, truth lies beyond emotion. Power lies beyond reaction. The man who can see clearly, act calmly, and move with precision, he is the one who builds an empire, quietly, consistently, without needing the world to clap, not ruled by ego, not baited by drama, but guided by wisdom, strategy, and silence. Because in a world where everyone wants to be seen, the real ones are working unseen. Thus remember, we are Indecepta. Becoming Indecepta is the code they never wanted you to learn. a psychological war map for men, forbidden teachings fused with modern strategy for influence, dominance, and self-mastery. If you want peace, prepare for war.